This is AmericasDemocratsorg, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Republicans like Marco Rubio and Eric Cantor say the war on poverty, now 50 years in the waging, has been an utter failure. But analyst Chris Wimer says statistics show that without government programs, many more Americans would be poor today. Congress is back in session, and Professor Alan Abramowitz says it's unclear how much of a grip the Tea Party retains on Republican lawmakers. And Bill Press talks with Congressman Tim Ryan about the House agenda. Don't expect much. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. 50 years ago, Lyndon Johnson announced the war on poverty. Since then, the poverty rate has dropped from 26% to 16%. Social scientist Christopher Wimer says the evidence shows that the federal programs worked. And joining us now on AmericasDemocratsorg, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Christopher Wimer is a research scientist at the Columbia Population Research Center. His research focuses on family economic well-being and the role of safety net and other social policies in the lives of disadvantaged populations. Christopher Wimer, thanks so much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Now, you and your colleagues recently issued a report showing that the social safety net is responsible for reducing poverty by nearly half since LBJ declared war on poverty 50 years ago. Now, I've read that President Obama has taken note of your findings. What action do you expect from the White House and Congress, if any?
Well, I'm probably certainly not the best person to go to sort of read the political tea leaves, if you will. But, there is a lot of talk right now, I guess, around extension of the unemployment insurance program, as well as discussions about raising the minimum wage. So both of those are sort of relevant for our findings on trends in poverty, particularly the unemployment insurance expiration. So there's been some work done at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, trying to decompose, the effect of the unemployment insurance extensions under the stimulus program to look at their anti-poverty impact. And in 2009, 2010, those extensions were responsible for keeping almost 3 million people out of poverty. So as those things expire, and if the economy continues to grow in sort of a sluggish way, we could see a big jump in poverty because of that. Similarly, with the minimum wage, some of our work, or some of the extensions of our work, where we show, if you were a full-time, full-year worker making the minimum wage, where that would put you relative to the poverty line. That was at its peak in 1968, so almost 45 years ago, or exactly 45 years ago. And that is sort of the real value of that minimum wage has really fallen over time, which means, the potential for a minimum wage job to help lift a family out of poverty has really sort of, taken a slide over time.
In fact, two. If you had two minimum wage full-time jobs, I still think you're probably close to still under, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the size of your family and the number of kids you're trying to support.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's often not enough.
Now, the president has made a point of talking directly about income inequality as a problem facing the nation, and we've been hearing about it for a while. What's more important, the number of people in poverty or the increasing income gap between poor and rich?
I guess that depends on this sort of key question of whether those two are related. And so what you've had over the past since the early 1980s is this real takeoff in income inequality. And so during the 80s, that was both the poor getting worse off and the rich getting richer. Since the 90s, that's been more of a story about the top just getting richer and richer and richer and just doesn't seem to stop. And so what people are concerned about there is if that rise in income inequality has prevented people at the bottom from advancing more than they would have if that income inequality hasn't taken off. And that's a really tricky question to answer. I'm not sure if we have the best evidence on that, but I would say we definitely have a poverty problem in this country, and we definitely have a mobility problem at the bottom, where the likelihood that you're going to remain poor as an adult if you start out poor as a child it's sort of shockingly high relative to some other countries. And so, any sort of anti-poverty policies or programs that can help accelerate mobility among those at the bottom, as well as help people make ends meet so that they have a better shot, is definitely helpful. I don't want to say it's more or less important than simply reducing income inequality.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Chris Wimer. He's a research scientist at the Columbia Population Research Center. One of your findings is that the percentage of the very poorest of the poor has remained stable at about 5% of the population for 40 years. Is that good news or bad news?
I mean, you can look at it either way. I tend to think of it as good news. 5% is still, 1 in 40 people has less than half the poverty line, so that's still a problem, right? But what's remarkable about our findings is that, regardless of economic downturns, regardless of the business cycle, this deep poverty rate is pretty stable around 5-6%. And we've gone through some pretty sizable economic downturns, just recently the Great Recession, but also that large recession in the early 80s. Rocky times in the 1970s, and for that to be so flat and not jump around as the business cycle goes up and down really sort of suggests that the safety net is largely doing its job. Some people will always, fall through the cracks, unfortunately, but that's a sign that the safety net is working, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. What is the effect of safety net programs on children in poverty?
So our research is simply about, people's pocketbooks. So we find that in 2012, the safety net kept around 9 million children out of poverty. But that's just looking at whether people are able to meet these basic needs. There's a lot of literature that colleagues at Columbia, but also elsewhere, have done looking at the impacts of the safety net on children's outcomes. And so, for instance, there's been work on both the food stamp program and a program called WIC, which is for women, infants, and children, provides, things like formula and milk and things like that to very young children. And those programs are found to actually have some pretty significant and positive developmental outcomes. So kids benefit from them, turn out healthier, do better in school and educational outcomes, et cetera. So these things can have long-term impacts for kids in terms of setting them on the right path.
Many economists say increasing the minimum wage will provide an immediate boost to the economy because of new spending. Will increasing the minimum wage actually help people out of poverty, though?
I think so. It may not be the most efficient anti-poverty tool in the arsenal. A lot of low-wage workers may already not be poor, either because they've pooled resources with other workers in their household, or maybe they've taken advantage of the earned income tax credit, and that's already helped them out of poverty. And some minimum wage workers are teenagers, and teenagers don't always contribute a lot to people's family incomes. But the real value of the minimum wage has declined a lot over time since the 1960s, and so finding ways to make work pay more for low-wage workers, will reduce the poverty rate. And there are studies by some prominent economists that have tried to quantify that and show that.
Mm-hmm. Now, do the poverty programs do a good job in keeping up with inflation in terms of providing the poor with enough benefits to help them pay for the rising cost of everything?
Often not. Social Security is a really good example of one that does. So in the 1970s, as that program was indexed to inflation, we saw these dramatic drops in elderly poverty. So to the extent that more of that could happen, I think it would definitely make a difference in these trends of poverty. You wouldn't have to, and you can see that in the minimum wage, which is not the type of safety net program we're talking about, but it takes a political act of will to sort of update and modernize where that minimum wage is set. And when you have that situation, the value of that benefit, the value of that program sort of erodes over time.
Speaking along those lines of how things are changing over time, talk a little bit about the methodology of measuring poverty, how they've changed in recent years and what it means. I mean, are we talking about statistical or real change?
Well, when you use the right statistics, you can measure real change. So what we argue in our study, in our set of papers, is that how you measure poverty, matters, and you really need to count the things that we're spending money on to reduce poverty. If you're not counting those, you're not going to show what government policy is contributing. And so that's become especially important in recent years. So some of the tools in our anti-poverty arsenal that have become most important are these things that are delivered through the tax system, things like the earned income tax credit, as well as things that come not in cash, but in sort of near cash form. So that's things like food stamps, school lunch, housing assistance. And those things are simply not counted in our official poverty statistics. And so, it makes sense if you don't count something, you won't show the anti-poverty impact of that program.
Right. Okay. Christopher Wimer, a research scientist at the Columbia Population Research Center. The research focuses on family economic well-being and the role of safety net and other social policies in the lives of disadvantaged populations. Chris, thank you so much again for your time with us today on AmericasDemocrats.org, and I hope we can do it again soon.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right. And this is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Political science professor Alan Abramowitz says that with new battles looming in Congress, it's unclear whether Republicans can stand up to the Tea Party. And we'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Perhaps you thought the political world was finally safe from the dynamic duo of Ford and Radel. But no, here they come, rushing back into the limelight. Rob Ford, the explosive mayor of Toronto, became a global punchline last fall when a video showed his honor smoking crack cocaine. Then came little blow-ups involving sexual harassment, a murder threat, knocking down a city councilwoman, and drunken rages. Yet, on January 2nd, Rob was back, filing for re-election and blurting out that my record speaks for itself. Well, he's right about that. Even less charming is Trey Radel, a first-term Congress critter from Fort Myers, Florida. His chief accomplishment in Washington was getting arrested last October for trying to buy cocaine from an undercover cop. But rather than humbly stepping down, or even quieting down, Trey called a December press conference to announce that he's healed. Having completed a 28-day treatment program for addiction, though apparently not for narcissism, the former TV anchorman declared himself fit to return to what I do, what you sent me to do in Washington. Presumably, that does not include scuttling around back alleys seeking drugs and drink. Radel said that, thanks to God and family, he's a changed man. For one thing, while he still insists that poor families should be subjected to drug tests in order to get food stamps, he has slightly amended that Dickensian stance. I think members of Congress should be tested as well, he said with a straight face. This is Jim Hightower saying, so Radel wants poor people's food stamps automatically taken away if they're caught using drugs. But a lawmaker who gets nabbed can keep drawing his $170,000 a year government salary. Still, that doesn't make Radel a hypocrite because, as Stephen Colbert points out, lawmakers don't get food stamps.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. President Obama's re-election drove the Tea Party crazy, says political science professor Alan Abramowitz. Now, he says, it's unclear whether the Tea Party agitators in Congress will continue to drive the Republican leadership crazy. And joining us now on AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Alan Abramowitz is the Alvin W. Barkley Professor of Political Science at Emory University, also the author of The Disappearing Center, Engaged Citizens, Polarization, and American Democracy. And he's also written an article outlining the threat to Republicans from the Tea Party. Alan Abramowitz, thanks very much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
I'm glad to be with you.
We're happy to have you with us as well. You know, in a recent article, you say Republican leaders can either stand up to the Tea Party and move the GOP back to the center, or they can continue to go down the path of long-term electoral defeat. Which way do you think mainstream Republicans will go?
Well, I think that's very unclear right now. I think we're certainly beginning to see this battle take place within the Republican Party. We've seen that some establishment Republicans, leaders in Congress, and some Republican-leaning business groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce have begun to take a stand against the Tea Party. And the differences there are they're not so much substantive as they are more kind of about style and strategy. The Tea Party members of Congress and the establishment Republicans there don't disagree about a lot of issues. Where they disagree about, I think, is whether at times you need to actually compromise with Democrats when you're in a situation where you only control one house of Congress and the Democrats control the other house and the White House. And the real disagreement is about that. And so how that's going to turn out, I think, is unclear. And I think the primaries coming up in 2014, where we're seeing a number of incumbents in the House and Senate challenged from the right, will give us an indication of what direction things are going in. And we're also seeing a couple of challenges to Tea Party members of Congress from the establishment. So, we'll know a little bit more in a few months, I think, about how this is all going to play out. But I think this is a battle that's going to continue for several years. And I think we're going to see it again in the 2016 cycle. In both Congress and, of course, in the presidential primaries. And, I think the 2016 presidential campaign is going to give us a real indication of what direction the Republican Party is going in when we see, what kind of candidate emerges in 2016, whether it's a sort of a more mainstream type candidate or whether it's an ultra-conservative Tea Party type candidate or whether even if it's a mainstream candidate, that candidate ends up having to move so far to the right to accommodate the Tea Party and the right wing that that he or she comes out of this nomination process in a rather weakened condition, as happened in both 2008 and 2012. Yeah,
I was going to say that's a familiar tune that we've heard recently.
Yeah, it is exactly. And in both of those years, we saw the sort of mainstream establishment type candidates, John McCain and Mitt Romney, were able to prevail. After battling generally more conservative challengers, but in both cases they had to move pretty far to the right and adopt some positions that I think came back to haunt them in the general election campaign.
Mm-hmm. Now, the government shutdown last year might have been seen by Tea Party adherents as a moment of glory, but don't you think it may actually have started reducing their influence? I mean, I got the feeling that John Boehner finally had an opportunity. Once they got that budget deal done, it was like finally I get a chance to actually knock these guys down a little bit.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. I think that on the one hand, the Tea Party were able to show their influence within the Republican Party and their ability to sort of force the leadership to go ahead with the shutdown and against their better judgment. I mean, I think it was pretty clear that Boehner, for one, really did not want to go in that direction, but he felt pressured to do so, and it was reluctant, at least initially to allow a budget to come or allow a vote on which he might lose a majority of his own caucus, and ultimately he did that, but that was after several weeks, and I think he was able to kind of convince his members, including many of the Tea Party members, that he had done as much as he could. But the way that played out and the way it ended, and then with the budget agreement and the vote on that, where actually a large majority of Republicans voted for the agreement, and the sort of Tea Party members were rather isolated, I think really hurt the Tea Party. You have within the Republican caucus in the House and even in the Senate, there's not a sharp delineation, I think, between Tea Party and non-Tea Party. With Tea Party versus establishment, it's not that clear cut. There's a sort of a continuum there from the those on the sort of, if you want to call it the left, although that's not a very good description for where those people are, but the more moderate mainstream Republicans on the one side to the far right on the other end, when you've got people like Michelle Bachmann and Louis Gohmert and Steve King and folks like that. But there's a group in the middle that's sort of the swing vote there within the Republican caucus who are very conservative, but I think ultimately Boehner was able to win them over and convince them to break with the far right true Tea Party supporters. And it's that sort of middle group who are, again, extremely conservative. I mean, in terms of the issues, they're right there when it comes to things like repealing Obamacare, but at the same time, I think they've become somewhat more leery of being dragged into these sorts of confrontations that just don't end well by the more extreme members of the caucus.
We're speaking with Alan Abramowitz, professor of political science at Emory University, author of The Disappearing Center, Engaged Citizens, Polarization, and American Democracy. So the budget deal, I mean, is that a sign of a pushback from the Republican establishment against the Tea Party? And if so, are there other signs of pushback from the
I think it
establishment?
is. I think the fact that you got a large majority of Republicans in the House voting for that agreement, and is a sign that, again, that these sort of you might call them swing voters within the Republican caucus, who are very conservative, but not really totally aligned with the Tea Party. We're actually turned against the Tea Party on that vote, and that's, I think, what gave the Speaker the freedom to feel that he could stand up there and be very critical of particularly some of the outside groups that were really pushing the party into the confrontation. Groups like Heritage Action and some of these other Tea Party groups outside of Congress. That was crucial. But the other thing, of course, is now the fact that we're seeing groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and some of the more establishment Republican groups, the sort of Karl Rove's groups, trying to mobilize against the Tea Party in primaries, both to defend Republican incumbents who are being challenged from the right, but also, in a few cases, even trying to recruit challengers to run against some Tea Party members of Congress, like Justin Amash in Michigan, who's going to face a pretty serious challenge. So I think how those primary races play out this year, I think, will give us some indication of the direction that the Republican Party is going in.
Now, you predict that it's unlikely that Republican primary voters will turn against the Tea Party as long as President Obama is in office. How do you account for the incredibly intense hatred of him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the real drivers of the support for the Tea Party. It's not just about issues. I mean, certainly they're conservative, but a lot of it just has to do with animosity toward the president. When you look at the polling data on what really distinguishes the sort of Tea Party Republicans from other voters and even from other Republicans, it's not just that they're more conservative, but that they have this sort of visceral dislike for the president, and that sort of drives them to support these sorts of sort of kamikaze kinds of strategies, just refusing to to do anything that would be seen as cooperating with the president. I think certainly race is a factor in this. I don't think there's any question that Obama's race, from the beginning, since his emergence on the national political scene, and certainly since his election in 2008, has just drive some of these people crazy. And
that's a pretty sad testament for it being the 21st century.
Yeah. So it isn't. It isn't. I think the sort of old-fashioned kind of racism. I think if you question these people, it's not that they would support segregation or something like that. But I think they're just very uncomfortable with the idea of someone who's different in the White House. But beyond that, I think it's not just Obama himself; it's Obama's coalition. And they see Obama as leading this sort of coalition of black people and brown people and other types of voters that they think are who are just different from them, and who are not, in some sense, what they would consider real Americans. The politician who I think has really tapped into this very, very effectively, was Sarah Palin. When she would go around the country and talk about it's great to be back here in the real America. She was standing there in some small town or rural area in front of a totally white, audience, and I think it's that sort of sentiment. It's this sort of subtle kind of it's a resentment of the kinds of changes that people see taking place in American society that they don't like. The way the society is changing, both the growing racial and ethnic diversity, growing secularism, decline of what they see as a decline of traditional values. All these things are perceived as a threat to the sort of a way of life and the status of the folks who support the Tea Party. So I think President Obama is kind of the largest kind of symbol of that change.
Now, before we let you go, you've got a pretty phenomenal record in predicting recent presidential elections. What's your prediction for the House and Senate races this year?
Well, I do have a forecasting model for House and Senate elections. It's a little too early to make any kind of real meaningful forecast. I will say, when you look at the House elections this year, of course, being a midterm election year means that the president's party, in this case, the Democratic Party, generally the president's party is going to lose at least a few seats. What makes the situation a little better in a way for Democrats is that, if you want to say it's both bad and good, there aren't that many Democrats in the House right now, and very few of the current Democratic members of the House occupy vulnerable districts. Unlike the situation in 2010, when a lot of Democrats were in vulnerable districts that tend to normally vote Republican, that's not the case anymore. There aren't more than about a dozen Democrats in those types of House districts. So there are actually slightly more Republicans in vulnerable districts, although there aren't a lot of them either. So the prediction I'd make at this point is just I think it's going to be a small swing one way or the other, and it's too early to say which way it's going to go, because I think we'll have to wait and see how the health care issue plays out, how the Affordable Care Act kind of plays out in the next few months, as well as some of these other issues that the Democrats are hoping to use, such as raising the minimum wage and the extending unemployment compensation, where I think Republicans are really vulnerable. We'll have a better idea of that by next summer, but I think it'll be a small swing, and to pick up 17 seats as the Democrats need in a midterm election with your president in the White House is very difficult. So, I'm not too optimistic about that happening. I think it's best case scenario for Democrats is maybe pick up a handful of seats. Worst case scenario is lose a handful of seats in the House. The Senate is where the action is going to be, and this because the situation in 2014 is that we've got, I think, 34 Senate seats that are up this year, and 21 of those seats are held by Democrats. This is this class of senators who were elected in 2008, which was a very good Democratic year. So it means there are a lot of Democrats up, and more significantly, there are 7 Democratic seats that are up that are in states that were carried by Romney, including 6 that were carried by Romney by at least 10 points. And so these are states like West Virginia and South Dakota and Louisiana and Arkansas and some others, and North Carolina, where it was, of course, a swing state. But so this is a crucial year for Democrats. Going to be trying to defend all of these tough these seats that are in states that are just very tough. And so I think some Republican gains are pretty likely. Republicans would need to gain 6 seats to get control of the Senate. And right now, I think that's possible. I see it as about a 50-50 proposition right now. So those Senate seats are going to be crucial, and it's very crucial for Republicans to make those gains this year, because 2 years later, when we get to 2016, that's a class, because that's the class that was elected in 2010, a very good Republican year. There are a lot of vulnerable Republican seats that are going to come up in 2016. So Republicans have their best opportunity. Of course, they've had opportunities like this before. The last 2 cycles, also gave Republicans opportunities. And in 2012, they had some great opportunities and they blew them. And so I think we could see that again this year if we see Republicans nominating more of these sort of ultra-conservative and not just ultra-conservative, but in some cases just pretty flaky candidates. And that could, again, cost them some seats that they should win.
Lots
or
for
at least
us
have a good chance.
Lots for us to keep an eye on. Alan Abramowitz, a professor of political science at Emory University, author of The Disappearing Center, Engaged Citizens, Polarization, and American Democracy. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
Very glad to talk with you.
And we appreciate it. We'll have you back again soon. And this is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio.
Meanwhile, here in Washington, D.C., everybody's back on the job. The Senate came back on Monday. The House came back on Tuesday. President Obama came back last Sunday. Can we expect to get anything done? Congressman Tim Ryan is here with the answers, representing Ohio's 13th District and the great cities of Youngstown and Akron. Good morning, Congressman. Good to see you.
Great to be with you.
I remember the good days when we were in Akron, Ohio, till they turned that station into a sports station. I'll never forgive them for that.
Town. Great town.
It is a great town.
Yeah.
We had 2 we broadcast twice from Akron, Ohio. Yeah, from in those days.
Nice.
Right, there was a famous breakfast place. Boy, I'm blanking. Just across the road from Kent State.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, it's a great place.
So you were in downtown Kent? You were right by.
No, it was just across the road from Kent State. It was a famous breakfast place. And they built a whole stage and everything for us when we broadcast there twice.
Oh, man.
And it was great. No,
well, we got to start work on getting you back.
Let's get back there. How are things going? You have a good vacation break?
Yeah, I had
and
a great break. A lot of snow, cold.
And you've been back 2 days already. What have you been doing? What have you been up to? What's the House accomplished in the last 2 days?
Yeah, a whole lot of nothing, and I think that's the plan really for this year is to just do suspension votes and, any kind of messaging legislation, and that's going to be about it. I think it's lay low, hit us on Obamacare, and, try to maintain control of the House of Representatives.
Well, there were stories before the break that it looked like this 113th, isn't it, session of Congress would be the least productive in the history of a Congress, and that 2013 was, in fact, the least productive year so far on record. I mean, obviously Democrats in the minority, doesn't the leadership care about that reputation?
Well, they I think talk to a lot of people in their base, and they say, well, that's great, they're not doing anything. Government is
that's why they're here, to do nothing.
That's right. Government is not functioning. They're not passing these unnecessary laws, and that's kind of their pitch. That's their bumper sticker slogan. The problem is, I think, as you know, and you talk about a lot, Bill, is that we are not positioning our country for what's to come in the next decade or two. How are we going to position our economy? What investments do we need to make? How do we need to drive down healthcare costs?
You can't just stand still.
You can't. You look at China and India investing billions of dollars in the three-dimensional printing, additive manufacturing, high-speed rail, infrastructure. They're spending, and granted, they're still developing, they're spending 7, 8, sometimes 9% of their GDP on infrastructure in China and India. And here we are wallowing at 1.5% maybe of our GDP, and we've got a lot of work that needs to get done. That's just one example. We could spend 2 shows talking about what we need to do. So it may be cute, may sound nice. Oh, they're not doing anything. Well, we're gonna pay the consequences of inaction.
They may be satisfying their Tea Party base, but I just wonder who else that they're appealing to.
Well, that's about it. But they're banking on in an off-year election, there's a lower turnout, get your base out, you win the election. And that happens to be true.
You know what I find, Congressman, so curious is it wasn't that long ago, 4 years ago, when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker, and even before then, the rule was that the House was the action body. The House passed substantive, serious debate on major issues, passed substantive legislation, and then it went to the Senate, and the Senate was known as the graveyard.
Right.
Some of these good ideas that you just couldn't get a hearing in the Senate. Now it's almost become, under John Boehner, the opposite.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the Senate, I'm not saying that they're like speedy, right? But they are getting some serious. They passed a farm bill, they passed an immigration bill, and now it's the House.
Yeah.
Where you can't get any action.
How relative things are when the Senate's the speedy body. Just think about where we are in the political process in the United States when the Senate's taking the lead on a lot of this stuff.
Even with a filibuster, right? They're able to get more.
Yeah, exactly. That's how sad it is right now. But you go ahead and look back, and I think this is why Nancy Pelosi is going to go down as one of the best speakers in the history of the United States. We passed not only health care, Lilly Ledbetter, and a lot of other things. We passed an energy bill out of the House. That really, if we would have been able to get through the Senate, I think our economy would be booming right now because we'd have set some parameters. We're making investments. There's this whole renewable energy sector that's waiting to explode, and we don't even know what it is. Right. Is it algae? Is it wind? Is it solar? What is it? But our job is to do the blocking and tackling, make the investments, set up the parameters, then let the private sector say, okay, these are going to be the rules, and boom, they'll start making investments, and I think you'll get an explosion. And what's good about the renewables, not to get off topic, but you're talking about solar and wind, you're talking about manufacturing jobs. There's 4,000 component parts in a windmill. There's, hundreds of tons of steel in a windmill. That's American-made product.
The solar panels, the installation, all of that.
You can't outsource installing solar panels.
No. So let's talk about a couple of items that are on the agenda right now. The Congress went home. I was there with the president 2 days ago when he chided Congress for going home and doing nothing about unemployment benefits. The Senate at least has said we're going to debate it. They got over the cloture vote. What are the prospects in the House?
I'm just not optimistic at all. I'd love to sit
for
here
nothing.
I think Boehner, he can be very stubborn, and you see it on a lot of different issues. But I just think he's going to hold the line on this, and it's an ideological thing. He, I think, doesn't want to cross the Tea Party and the caucus too many times. But hopefully we can try to put enough pressure on the folks that are up for re-election and say, hey, this is a values issue. I was at a food bank in Akron the other day, going through 950 families a month go through there, Bill, and you can't help walk through that place and not think, you know what? You, me, is maybe good as our life is. We're one tragedy away from being in that line.
Absolutely.
One. Thank God you're not in there and help these people. That's the way, I was brought up. That's the way you were brought up. And you would think all these people who talk family values and talk about being Christian and all of this stuff. I went to Catholic school for 12 years. I'll tell you what every nun, priest, and teacher would tell me to do about this right now.
Yeah.
Anybody who studied the New Testament would tell us what to do right now. It's easy. You're one tragedy away. You're one healthcare case away. Fortunately, we're changing that. Mm-hmm. But how many people in my district a 3 years ago, 1,700 families went bankrupt because of a health care issue. Guess where you end up? Right. You end up in the food line.
So again, President Obama said the other day that it's not just the 1.3 million Americans who lost their unemployment insurance, that if they don't do something this year, there are like 14 million Americans, because you got their spouses, you got their kids, you got suppliers and all that.
Right.
And these are people who are, for no fault of their own, unemployed for more than 6 months, and they're out there looking for jobs.
They are. There's 3 people looking for every one job. And how disrespectful it is to say, oh, you're lazy. Yeah. Well, wait a minute. People in my district are out looking. A steel mill with 1,000 good-paying jobs closed down in the last year and a half. Those guys are out there looking for work. They don't want to sit home. Yeah. They want to go out and work. And when they were working, they would work 6 days a week. They'd work 7 days a week. These guys would take up any overtime they could possibly get at any job they've ever had. And so for some smug politician to come along and say, oh, this is a giveaway, these are the takers, it's so disrespectful to people who are trying to make ends meet for their family.
So are you similarly pessimistic about any increase in the minimum wage?
I'm generally pessimistic these days.
I'm trying to find something that might...
I think there's no shot in the House of any increase in the minimum wage.
$7.25. They did it. Republicans did it for George W. Bush.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not for him, but they did it because he was president. He wanted it. He supported it.
Yeah.
Now, why not now? Just because Obama's in the White House?
Yeah, pretty well. And then the party is conservative as it was then. Remember, Bush campaigned on being compassionate conservative. And it's tough to find a compassionate conservative.
That's a 4-letter word today, compassionate conservative, man. Yeah. You call yourself a compassionate conservative. Oh, yeah. If you're a Republican in Congress.
We'll show you compassion. Get up.
Yeah, right. For a Republican to use that phrase today means I'm out of office.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you get primaried.
You'd get primaried.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh, you said something nice about President Obama, or you hugged Charlie Crist. Oh, you gave him a hug.
Yeah.
You're out. Well,
let me try a third issue: immigration reform. All right, now we know John Boehner has hired this woman who used to work for whoever is the expert on immigration reform. Everybody says this means that the House is John Boehner's ready to do something about immigration reform. Yes, no?
Well, that indicates he wants to at least look at it and try to maybe find a middle ground. And this may even be a setup, maybe not for this year, but maybe going into the presidential. And that may be the strategy for the Republicans, is to say, I don't think we can do it this year. Our base doesn't necessarily want this, but maybe going into 2016, whoever our nominee is, we're going to, and demographics are going to continue to change. Maybe by then we should have something pieced together. But you never know. There may be something small, maybe a DREAM Act style piece of legislation that's even more watered down than the DREAM Act is. Which we support, but it certainly is not comprehensive immigration reform.
The theory I hear is that Republicans believe, immigration reform is important on the national level. So, that's important for 2016, but it's not really important in the congressional level, and so we don't need to do anything about it in 2014. Do you buy that theory? Do you think that's what's driving them?
I think so. I think that's it. You know, and then, again, it's ignoring what's good for the economy, what's humane,
what's good for the country,
what's good for the country, what's most humane for the families who are separated or dealing with all the complexities that come with trying to get into the United States, or half the family being in the United States, or people getting deported from the United States, or whatever the case may be. And, you know, you see in places even like Youngstown and Akron, the things that are burgeoning in our areas, because we have the University of Akron and Youngstown State University, these little tech sectors, these business incubators that are starting to grow. You know, we started with 10, 20 people. Now they're 300 or 400, and they're making $60,000 a year in downtown Youngstown or in Akron. These are big jobs. What throws gas on that fire? Immigration reform. Making sure we keep well-educated people who come and go to Case Western Reserve or go to Carnegie Mellon or go to Akron.
Have the skills that these companies need,
and they're going to come in and they're going to create value. They're going to create wealth. So people say, well, they're going to take my job. No, they're going to create value and wealth, and they're going to create more jobs of which everyone else is going to benefit from. But that gets ignored because it's not good for the Tea Party base.
So what are the prospects for the Congress this year? Any action at all? Congressman Tim Ryan here. Doesn't look too good at the moment. Congressman Tim Ryan here in studio with us, representing Ohio's 13th district. You see, we tell you all the time, we're right here on Capitol Hill, just down the street from the United States Capitol building. So, Congressman, it's nice for you to stop by on your way to work.
Yeah, this is easy.
What office building are you in?
Longworth.
Yeah. Okay. So
my apartment's
Cannon,
about
Longworth,
five blocks over there.
Is that right?
Yeah, on the Senate side. So
you're a Hillite.
I am.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, now you know how easy it is to get by. Come by as often as you can.
Absolutely.
Let's say I want to ask you about Obamacare, but let's say a quick hello to Mary calling out in Chicago on the great WCPT in Chicago. Hi, Mary. Stay warm and good morning.
Thank you. It's cold. I have a question.
Yes.
Don't workers pay into unemployment and also Social Security? So I don't hear any complaints when workers are paying in. I only hear complaints when we get paid out. I mean, what's going on?
That is an excellent question, Mary. Take your answer on the air. She's right, isn't she?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, this is one of the things that...
It's an insurance plan, right?
It's an insurance plan, just like Medicare, just like Social Security. And we have done a bad job, I think, of talking about this as some government program, some entitlement, you know, when it's people pay into these programs and they want to get out what they put in. And, you know, healthcare costs go up, so Medicare is kind of a little bit of a different animal because of, you know, people are taking out more than they put in because of healthcare costs.
Yeah.
But part of what's driving healthcare costs is that a lot of people, you know, wait to go into Medicare to get their care because they don't have care. You know, you go to Youngstown, Ohio, Akron, Ohio, people 55, 60 years old lose their job. They put off any care that they would need until they get into the Medicare program. So that in and of itself makes you sicker and drives up healthcare costs for once you do get in. So there's all these other complexities that the healthcare bill should take care of. But again, I think those of us who are Democrats need to talk more about this is something that people pay into.
Right. And it does undercut Boehner's argument that we have to pay for this. Well, it's paid for, for a large part by the workers who have put in their money. But I do want to ask you, we have about a minute left. So with all the problems with the launch of the website, what do you hear from your district? You just came back from being out there for a couple of weeks. Are people now comfortable that Obamacare is working, and are they signing up? What's happening?
Yeah, people are starting to sign up more. We have benefited from Medicaid expansion in Ohio, so we have a lot of my constituents who have benefited from that expansion. And the news is different now, so we're starting to hear about the benefits. One of the things I think, Bill, is just paints the picture. 130,000 less patients have had to go who went to the hospital have returned back to the hospital. So that we are bending the curve of people who would normally go to the hospital, get treated, and a day later they'd come back. Because of the reforms we set up, that number is going down, and it's down by about 130,000 people. That is the kind of reform that the Affordable Care Act has put into place.
So Democrats don't have to run away from it.
No, we're going to win this in the long run. We got to hang tough, though.
All right. Well, let's win the House back, too, while we're at it.
You got it.
2014, all right?
Back to work.
All right. Well, let's get back to work. Congressman Tim Ryan, thanks so much for coming in. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Make it a great 2014.
Thank you.
That's all for AmericasDemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Christopher Wimer, Alan Abramowitz, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For AmericasDemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to